Hey guys, it's Thomas here, and today I want to talk about something a little bit more fun, a little bit more upbeat, and that's aquarium decor. And more specifically, one element of aquarium decor that you can essentially utilize to make your tank look awesome. And I wouldn't say it's necessarily overlooked, but I feel the way the aesthetics of aquariums have gone in the more recent years, people are going towards a more minimalistic look and pull the aquarium scape into the aquarium off of all the walls and try to basically make it look like there's no glass there. So you're looking at a small slice of nature. And personally, I love that look. I've utilized it myself with different reef aquariums, planet aquariums. But there's definitely something that needs to be said for 3D aquarium backgrounds. And that's what I want to talk about today. I actually have a selection of 3D aquarium backgrounds here with me. And I'm basically going to tell you about the ins and outs of these backgrounds, who makes them, and what I do like and don't like about each one. All right, and that's really all I'm here to do. It's kind of like a 3D background showdown of sorts. Background number one is a foam background. This is just essentially a hard foam background. Lots of 3D backgrounds, whether they're DIY or prefab like this one, are made from foam. And there's one major kind of drawback to using foam, and that would be the fact that foam likes to float, which means in order for this to stay in the tank, realistically, you're going to want to silicone it in. And the reason you'd rather silicone it than maybe just, cut it perfectly to length so it wedges in there nicely is that you're going to get water trapped behind it. It'll slowly flow back there. It's not going to be watertight, but then the water doesn't have the opportunity to come back to the show side of the aquarium. It gets trapped right behind it, and that can sometimes create an anoxic zone or an oxygen poor zone where you can get a buildup of some less friendly bacteria. For that reason, I always recommend siliconing them in, unless you're planning to, like I said, cut it perfectly to size, maybe wedge it in place with a small gap behind it and perforate it with a bunch of holes. Then maybe you could potentially use it as a false wall, keep your heater back there, filter, and then pump water from one side of the wall to the other. But you'll notice that it's basically a solid gray that's been dry brushed with a much lighter gray to try to bring some highlights out and show the texture. There's also a little bit of green in there to make it look kind of like it's been weathered or has some algae or lichen or akin grown on it. There's tons of texture to it, don't get me wrong, but at the end of the day, this doesn't really look like realistic rock. The other thing I don't really like about it is the fact that you can scratch the paint off with your nail. So the problem I'm going to have with that is when it comes time to clean this background, there's a good chance you're going to rub off some of this paint, which not a massive deal because the foam itself is a dark gray, so it's naturally going to be rock colored no matter what. But I don't know, I don't really like that. So basically, the drawbacks of this background are the fact that it really should get siliconed in place. It's what it's designed to do, which means you can really only install it on an aquarium you haven't set up yet. Otherwise, you're tearing down a tank to try to put a background in, which is just not practical. Number two, it doesn't really look that realistic. And number three, the paint's going to come off. But the biggest plus of this background is the price point, because for a background like this, you're only expecting to spend about $40. And this is for a 24 by 16-inch background designed for a 20-gallon tank. The next type of background we're looking at is a Polyresin background. So first thing you're going to notice is this looks a lot more like natural stone, which is great. If your goal is to make your tank look as natural as possible, this has definitely got a leg up on the foam. This is heavy and it's going to sink. It's not going to float. It's very thin. The actual material is quite thin. It's fiber reinforced, so it's relatively strong too. And the other thing is, nothing's coming off when I'm scraping at it. So that means the color should stay there for you as well. If you have a large aquarium and you're putting this kind of background in, it's got to go in sections. Most larger aquariums are going to have a center brace. The only way to get past it is to have this background cut in twain, which is usually just a straight line down the background. They'll usually sell them to you in two pieces if that's the case. For me, that's a bit of a pet peeve because I don't want to see a line down the center of my natural background. I mean, you could put a plant there to try and cover it, but that's not ideal. I think it really disrupts the look of the background. But the nice part is because this background is heavy and it can drop right in, this doesn't have to go into a tank you're just setting up. You could have a tank and decide, you know what, I want a 3D background, and you'll be able to drop this right in. Now, although this background is fairly realistic, I do have a pet peeve with the color, and that's the fact that it's basically a few tones of gray, but it doesn't seem to be in any way strategically painted to emphasize the depth of the stone. What I would prefer is if small nooks and crannies like this were purposefully darkened up to make them look deeper than they are. Same with all the texture here. On camera right now, you're getting a lot of shadowing from my pot lights, but if I tilt it, you'll see it's pretty much all the same color, right? I do have a little bit of color there, then that rock has a little bit of darker gray in it. But I mean, overall, I can't say that it looks like it was done intentionally to bring out the depth of the background. A Polyresin background like this one is gonna run you for a 24 by 16 inch. This one's a little bit shorter, it just happened to be the one I had on hand, right? But 24 by 16 inch is gonna be at about $120. Now, $120 may seem steep, but you are getting a background that is a lot more realistic looking than the foam, right? It's a big difference. And ultimately, it's going to be easier to work with, easier to get in the tank, no silicone, no mess, no worries. Just to sum it up, the cons of this background are essentially, A, you got to look at this foam on the side of it. B, although it's super realistic, the color is just really not impressive. Like, it's actually got a bit of a sheen to it, which doesn't show up on camera very well, but it reflects light. It is rigid, and if you drop this on a hard surface, it is possible that you could crack it. If I torque on it, you can hear it almost cracking. I wouldn't say that it's fragile, but it is possible to break it. The only way to get it past the center brace is to have it cut. They'll often sell them in two pieces, but then you've got a big line you got to stare at. It is a pretty realistic looking background. You can stick it in a tank that's already set up and wet without worrying about, having to silicone it in because it's just not necessary. It will act as a false wall because it does allow water to bypass on each side. So you can hide all your equipment behind it too very easily, and it's going to clean up the aquarium and give it a pretty realistic look. All right, the third style of background I have here is a rubber background. It's also reinforced, just like the Polyresin, with fiber. It's got a very thin profile to it, right? The actual material is quite thin. It's got a lot more weight than the other two backgrounds. And although it may not seem to have quite as much going on in actual pieces of rock as the Polyresin, this is by far, hands down, the most realistic looking rock background I have ever personally come across. It's hard to, on camera, show you all of the incredible amounts of detail that have gone into this, but the background itself has a lot of texture, like a lot. Even this tiny amount here, this little crack that looks like in the rock, that actually has texture to it. That's not painted on, that's physically there. And unlike the foam background, it has all kinds of little dots in it, because essentially it's styrofoam that's been carved out. This just looks like stone. 100% looks like stone. It's more than one color. You've got some different yellows in there. You've got whites in there, different grays, dark grays, light grays, all over the place, all mixed in quite well. You've even got some green tones in there. You've got what looks like an overhang, which is quite deep. My finger gets buried in that, right? What looks like separate pieces of stone. And at the end of the day, that just looks like a giant piece of stone. Now, I did talk to the manufacturer of this background because I wanted more clarification. They put a lifetime warranty on this background. Lifetime. If anything ever happens to it, they will replace it. That means if you start having color come off, which by the way, I can't get color off of this. I've scratched at it. I've even taken a really harsh brush to it and scrubbed at it. None of this comes off. And I was really curious as to how, because it looks like a very thin layer of paint. But it turns out they don't paint these backgrounds. This is rubber on rubber. So it's actually fused together. They're painting with different colors of rubber, and it comes out absolutely incredible. Blew my mind when I first saw it. But I'm going to stop talking about the aesthetics of it because I could go on for hours about this stuff. It looks so awesome. So let's talk about how you get this in your tank. Well, first off, you can just drop it in. Just like the Polyresin background, you don't really have to worry at all about tearing a tank down to set this up. You can literally drop it into a tank that already has fish in it. It will act as a false wall. Although it doesn't have the foam on the side, the nice thing is these are designed to fit snugly in the aquarium and provide about a 1 millimeter gap around the outside on both sides, which will actually allow for adequate water flow so that if you have the intake of your filter behind this and the output in front, you will get all the water pouring into the tank, coming around the background, and then back into the filter, creating a false wall that's going to work pretty efficiently without having any foam on the side. So your fish won't get stuck back there. They won't be able to get back there at all, but you've got that false wall. You can put your heater back there. You can put any other equipment you don't want to be seen back behind the false wall. That way, it's basically your fish and this natural looking background. If for whatever reason you've got a higher GPH rating or you're finding it is too tight on the sides, it's really easy to modify this background. You could easily, right up under here where you'd never see it, drill a bunch of holes, and that would be the intake. You could also do that over here, pop holes wherever you want, and essentially you'd be getting tons of water flow through the background. Another huge plus of these backgrounds is that they are flexible. It is rubber. So if you have a larger tank or a center brace and you want to try to get this in, you don't have to cut this. It's not necessary. You can literally just drop this in and fold it past the center brace if necessary, which in my opinion is a massive advantage aesthetically, because the last thing you want is a line or a crack down the center that's perfectly straight to disrupt that extremely natural look that you've got going on. Now, I will talk about the only real drawback of having this sort of background, and it is the price. The price is more than what I would probably assume the average aquarist with a 20-gallon aquarium is willing to spend on this kind of a background. This background would be approximately $250. So that sounds like a ton, because if you consider you can pick up like a 20-gallon starter kit for about $130, your background being like pretty much double the cost of that seems cost prohibitive. Like why would you want to do that? But I do have a rebuttal to that, and that is what it would cost you to fill that tank's back with aquarium rock, or even with just resin ornaments and different types of ornaments in the tank to fill it up to try to make it look pretty. You could easily spend $150 or $200. Jumping up to $250 to get something that's going to look incredibly natural, it makes sense to me, especially because it has the lifetime warranty. You can't damage these backgrounds. And the fact that there is no way that you're going to be able to stack a rock up in the back of the tank and have this kind of a slim clearance, right? You're going to end up losing a lot of space inside the aquarium, not to mention the actual weight you'd be putting on that bottom pane of glass if this was an actual rock background. But it's not, it's rubber, and it's not that heavy, right? All right, guys, now I just got to tell you where each of these comes from and what you can expect to find. Number one, right over here, we've got the foam background. It's made by Underwater Treasures. You can pick it up at your local Big Al's. They've only got a couple of styles. There's this rock and then a reddish or brownish rock with some roots over top of it. And they only come in this 24 by essentially 16 panel. Next up, we've got, boom, right over here. This is the AquaticFX background. It's the Polyresin background. They've got a bunch of different styles. If you're into a more Amazonian look that has some wood in it, or maybe a minimalistic rock and wood kind of setup, they've got you covered. They also have what looks like a limestone or coral setup. They do all kinds of sizes of tanks. Just remember the larger sizes, if you have a center brace, they're going to be in panels. Then we've got right here, this is AquaDecor. They have an absolutely staggering selection of backgrounds in either their handmade custom backgrounds or their Slim Series backgrounds. There's everything under the sun that you can think of. They have one that looks like Jasper rock. They've got ones that look almost like the Grand Canyon, that type of rock, gray rocks, dark rocks. They've got wood, all kinds of different backgrounds, all sizes. You can literally tell them what size your tank is on the inside, give them the dimensions, and when you get that background, it will slip in like a glove. It's kind of crazy how well they fit. Up there for price, but you get every penny's worth. I honestly can't say enough about them. I'm not the kind of person who wants to spend tons of money on stuff, but I'm the kind of person who, if I've spent money on something and there was a reason it cost that much, I'm happy to talk about it. And there's a reason that these cost as much as they do. And it's because of the quality and the look. Like, you just can't compare it to anything. But that being said, all these backgrounds are a great option depending on what your budget is. Again, about 40 bucks over here, 120 over here. Depending where you want to get in and what your goals are with your aquarium, there's definitely a 3D background out there for you. So just consider it. You know, not everything has to be naked walls and your aquascape stuffed in the middle, although that looks great as well. If you want it to be a little bit more cave-like or riverbank, you know what? No shame in doing that, and 3D background's definitely going to help out. Anyways, guys, thanks again so much for watching another video. I'm going to try to keep these coming at least once a week, but life gets hectic. Maybe it'll be once every 2 weeks. I'm going to do my best. Like I said, you guys started subscribing before I even had videos, which was massively flattering. So I'm going to try to bring the content. That's going to be my job. If there's anything specifically you'd like to see, just let me know. Drop it down in the comment section below. If you have any questions or comments regarding these backgrounds or my experience with 3D backgrounds or anything else, even if it doesn't have anything to do with this video specifically, feel free to drop them in the comment section. I'll get back to you guys as quickly as I can. And as always, guys, just keep on tanking.